We're continuing to talk, by the way, about the decision from the Supreme Court just about 3 hours ago to end the affirmative action, the use of race as part of college and university admissions. Having really interesting conversations there, 800-282-2882. We've also discussed legacy admissions, the meritocracy in general. How do the schools actually do at educating people? In other words, how much of your success in life is attributable to where you went? Would you agree with that, Buck, that you don't have kids yet, but I think the number one sales pitch of a university is, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this idea, the university sells the idea that if you come here, you will be more efficient and more successful in life than you would be if you didn't. And the more elite the university is, the more they sell the idea that your future life will be more successful as a function of the 4 years that you would have spent in an undergrad institution there. That's basically the essence of why you would be willing to pay $75,000 or $80,000 a year to go to these schools, right?
Yeah, and I think a vast majority of cases of these different schools, it's just not true. If you're a hardworking, industrious, smart person, you'll do well wherever it is that you go. They used to be real door openers. You know, there's like on-campus recruiting, and if you went to the right school, I mean, I can tell you, I don't know if you had a different experience. Nobody ever cared where I went to school. The alumni network never lifted a finger for me. I remember I was encouraged by my, we had kind of a, career guidance counselor, and encouraged to write letters to alumni in different industries I was interested in, like actual old school, read a letter like, hey, I didn't even get a response. I think I wrote 10 letters.
Yeah.
Like no one even responded, which was good. I realized like, okay, so that was all a scam. There's no alumni network that's going to help me or whatever, but it's all right. I wanted to go work at the CIA anyway, so it didn't really make much difference to me. But at the time I saw this a lot. And I think that, Clay, the value of these degrees is going down because ultimately this is an arms race. Ultimately, this is inherently competitive, which gets lost in this conversation. Harvard talks about, we need like holistic and the benefits of diversity. People go to Harvard because 95% of the people who apply to Harvard don't get in.
Yeah.
So they're very happy to they're very happy to crush a lot of people's dreams. And as we saw in this case, a lot of like Asian kids who are geniuses' dreams, very happy to tell them you don't get to go to Harvard because we think that there's something more important than the excellence you've shown academically. The whole thing is premised on how hard is it to get in, because then that becomes how valuable is this in the marketplace, the job marketplace when you graduate, and what does this mean? The value of a Yale degree. Why won't Yale ever change its name? Yale is named for a slave trader, everybody.
Yep.
Yale will never, ever change its name as a university because you go there so that when you're at a cocktail party or a job interview, you go, well, as a Yale man, and everyone goes, ooh. But here's my point. I don't think everyone goes, ooh, anymore. I think that people less and less think that this stuff really even matters. Clay, I got into Ivy League business MBA programs. I didn't do it. I went to work for Glenn instead. So I sit here as somebody who went through this. Now, you could say, well, I went to undergrad. Yeah, but what I realized was that I know plenty of people that get these MBAs because they think, it's going to open all these doors to be amazing. Maybe. It's all very situational. It's not some golden ticket to this amazing future. And that's, to your point, what the promise is for all these kids is if you get in, it's going to be such an easier life for you. No, for a lot of people going to sometimes it's better to be on the other team, the practice team, so you can get better and better. And then, life is a long game. I just feel like people need to stop thinking that.
It's interesting, Buck. GW was probably the worst school that I got into, but they gave me an academic scholarship. And there are a lot of kids out there right now who, let's say you live in Georgia. The University of Georgia has an incredible honors college. You might get into Emory. You might get into Vanderbilt. You might get into Duke. I bet the education that you're going to get in the honors college at Georgia is every bit as good. You asked a good question. You said, hey, I don't think that I got a single benefit from going to George Washington University. I mean, and I'm not trying to take a shot at GW. It's a great school in D.C. If your kids just got in and you're like, I'm so excited.
In the Northeast, I'll tell you, it's considered like a rich kid school. So, because it was the most expensive school in the country, and
it's certainly a super rich kid school, and those rich kids help pay for my scholarship. So I thank them for that. Right? They charge a lot, but D.C. is a fabulous place to go. All these things. I will say grad school, Vanderbilt University Law School, I do think, in my experience, where you go to law school, the alumni networks are very helpful in getting you those initial jobs when you come out of law school, because they have on-campus interviews. I think Vanderbilt University Law School, I met my wife there. It's the best 3 years of my life I've ever spent. I can't speak highly enough about it. But I also think a lot of people come out of law school, they have so much debt, Buck. They have to go, you know this, your sister's in a big firm. Like, the big firm lifestyle is not conducive to people being like, this is amazing. You work 80 hours a week. You basically are chained to your desk. Much of that time is spent trying to pay off of your existing law school loans. You aren't doing, for the most part, high-level intellectual work. It's a lot of grunt work. There are worse jobs. I'm not saying it. But I do think this idea gets sold to kids that is oftentimes not reflective. And look what I did. I went into media and ended up, completely doing something different.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, I remember at Amherst where I went, there was all this on-campus recruiting, and it was really overwhelmingly in two fields, because you got to remember, this is 2004, so it's pre-Great Recession, and it was investment banking and management consulting. Go work for Goldman, go work for McKinsey. That was kind of, or some variation of those firms out there, JP Morgan or whatever.
And those are sweatshops out there for people who don't know what investment banking jobs are for young kids. They are brutal.
Well, see, this is what I was going to tell everybody. Of the people I knew who did that, and a lot of my graduating class went to those places, almost none of them stayed in those fields. Almost none of them. I mean, at this point, I mean, one out of 20, 1 out of 30 maybe are still working. And I mean, I'm not just talking about at that firm. I mean, in that business. I had a friend who got out, went into finance, and he got into the restaurant business. I had another friend who got out, went into finance, and then he went. So now people will argue, they'll say, well, it's a huge benefit to your resume to go to one of those fancy places. It helps you go other places. But the point is that the way that career fields work now, you and I are both examples of this in sort of both different and similar respects, is that you figure out where you have opportunity, where you want to be, what you think you're good at, and you move and maneuver. Spend 30 years at the company and be a company man and retire, and that's just much less common these days anyway. So that whole notion I think is changing very rapidly, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, let me say this, too. This is a good email I just got from one of our listeners, Carl. He said, I have to disagree with your statement that a university degree doesn't matter after your first job. I'm 60 years old, and my association and degrees from Texas A&M help me regularly in my business. Otherwise, you and Buck have a great show. It's a good point I should bring up. I do think, Buck, you were mentioning athletics earlier.
I like, though, otherwise good show. I'll take it. I'll take it. Okay.
You're totally wrong on, which I respect. You're totally wrong on this. I will say, if you have a strong association with your alumni group, and sometimes that can be, hey, we are all monster fans of, and I bet this guy is a big Texas A&M Fighting Aggie fan, and you go back to games all the time, and your network is very much connected in that way, that can have a long-term impact in a super positive way, where it's not necessarily, though, the degree. It's basically the fraternity and relationships that you have with all of these people. And if you are a diehard fan of a sports team, it is true that you may look at some of those initial applications when they come in and be like, oh, this person went to my favorite school, and you may be more likely to respond to it. I don't think anybody ever saw me go to GW and was like, oh, I got to give this kid a job. Now, I went straight to law school. Again, I'm not trying to take a shot at GW because I don't want somebody, inevitably people that are out there, Buck, right now, they're like, little Susie or little Johnny just graduated from high school and the family's ecstatic and they're going to be paying X number of dollars and everything. I think it's the individual. That's my ultimate takeaway.
But you can also get a great education. We live in an era with the democratization of education and your ability to be an autodidact of a really high caliber is leaps and bounds beyond what it ever used to be. I don't even think that many people know whether it's Khan Academy or there are a whole series of Yale. I mean, I've listened.
How
to
about our friends at Hillsdale who put out incredible programming all the time that you can go check out. I mean, that's free.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. You have access to whole university lecture series and their reading list if you want, which any of you who've been to university know, that's basically what college is. You go to lectures, you do some papers, you have exams, rinse, repeat. That's what it is. So it's all out there. You can get an excellent excellent education at so many of these places. They all have the resources and the basics to put it in place for you. But I think that people are going to be changing a lot of their view here. That, you know, I'll tell you, growing up in New York City, Clay, it's if you didn't get into an Ivy or something similar, oh man, everyone's like, oh, that's rough. You know, you're
Northeast is obsessed with schools
obsessed
in a
with
way
this
that
stuff.
almost no other part of the country is.
You know, and everyone's can point out, well, yeah, Stanford's not an Ivy, Duke's not an Ivy, et cetera. Those are amazing schools in terms of the difficulty of getting in. But I think that it's changed. I think the whole system has changed, and it's changed in part because of legacy admissions, athletic recruiting, affirmative action. There are reasons that people get into these schools that they're such amazing. I wouldn't even say that, you know, it's not about how smart somebody is, but how well did they perform academically in high school. There are a lot of people who didn't perform very well academically in high school who went to these places, right? I mean, that's, you know, I think famously Jared Kushner was like dead last in his class in high school. Went to Harvard.
Oh, I didn't know that. I will say this too, Buck. The best argument I think you can make is one that Carl kind of hit on. I think the peer group, to the extent that you pay for your peer group, being surrounded by super smart people, I think you learn more outside of college oftentimes than you do in the classroom. And certainly the relationships that you make with the classmates that you meet there ends up being the most valuable aspect, I would say, of college or law school or any graduate degree that you would get. But it's just such a fascinating debate and discussion, I think, in general, that's all tied in with what the Supreme Court did today.